My son said that I was no longer part of his life and that he owed me nothing. You are not important. So, when he came asking for money after his wedding, I told him to let his new family pay for it. For as long as I can remember, my life has revolved around my son. Raising him alone was not easy, but I never complained. It was necessary to ensure that he had everything he needed. From the moment I held him in my arms, I knew that my entire world would shrink down to his well-being, his happiness, and his success. I worked tirelessly, taking extra shifts whenever necessary, sacrificing my own pleasures without hesitation, all with one goal: to give Ethan a life without hardships. But it wasn't just financial security that drove me to be the mother I was. It was also the responsibility of raising him with values, with gratitude, with the understanding that everything he had did not come from nowhere, but from the relentless efforts of a mother who gave him everything. Throughout his childhood and teenage years, I was his biggest supporter. I was the one who attended every school event, who celebrated each of his victories, no matter how small, and who picked up the pieces when things didn't go his way. I always believed our relationship was strong, that the bond we had built over the years was unbreakable. But I was wrong. At some point, without me even noticing, everything I had built began to crumble. It all started when Ethan met Madison, a young woman who, from the moment she entered his life, marked a before and after in his attitude. At first, I thought it was just the excitement of a new relationship. It's normal that when someone falls in love, their world narrows a little and their attention shifts toward the person they want to spend their time with. I wasn't worried, but I noticed small changes. He no longer called as often. His visits became less frequent. Our conversations grew more superficial. I tried not to overthink it, convincing myself that it was just a phase. But as time passed, the signs became too obvious to ignore. The first time I truly felt pushed aside was on his birthday. We had always had a tradition of having dinner together that day. But this time, when I asked about his plans, he simply told me he would be busy. No invitation. No explanation. Later, I found out through social media that he had celebrated with Madison's family, with his friends, with everyone except me. I felt a tight knot in my chest, but I decided not to make a scene. I justified his behavior, thinking maybe he didn't want Madison to feel like she had to share him. Maybe it was just a matter of adjustment. But time only confirmed what I already knew deep down. With each passing week, Ethan drifted further and further away from me. He became someone almost unrecognizable, a man who, despite being raised with love and sacrifice, acted as if I didn't exist. I watched him disregard my efforts, behave as if everything I had given him meant nothing, as if being his mother was nothing more than a footnote in his story. And then, when he announced his engagement to Madison, I felt a mix of. A part of me was happy for him. He had always dreamed of this moment. But another part, the deepest part of me, couldn't ignore the feeling that I no longer had a place in his life. Still, I forced myself to think positively. Maybe this would be a new beginning for us, an opportunity to rebuild what seemed to have been lost. But the months leading up to the wedding only reinforced my fears. I wasn't included in almost anything. Every time I tried to get involved, I was met with curt responses from Ethan or vague excuses about how everything was already under control. No one consulted me about the preparations. No one asked for my opinion on anything. And when I asked if I could help with something, Madison, with her condescending tone, told me she didn't want to bother me with such tedious details. I stayed quiet, swallowing the lump in my throat, trying to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting, that maybe this was normal. But it wasn't. When the wedding day finally arrived, I went with my heart in my hands, hoping that despite everything, this moment would still be special. I dressed carefully, choosing a dress I had picked out weeks in advance, wanting to be presentable for the occasion, only to face the greatest humiliation of my life. When I arrived at the Grand Oak Wedding Hall, the staff at the entrance looked at me with confusion. They checked the guest list, and after a few seconds of awkward silence, they told me my name wasn't there. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. I tried to explain. I tried calling Ethan, but he didn't answer. And then Madison appeared, with her fake smile and syrupy voice, looking at me as if I were a nuisance she needed to get rid of. With a sickening calmness, she said that she and Ethan had decided it would be best if I didn't attend. "We don't want any drama." Those were her exact words. As if my presence at my own son's wedding would somehow ruin their day. At that moment, I understood everything. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. My son had made a conscious decision to erase me from this important day. I stood there at the entrance, feeling like a stranger, an outsider in the life of the person I had given everything for. An indescribable emptiness washed over me, a wound I knew would never fully heal. I turned around and walked away, my dignity shattered, but with the certainty that something had changed forever. The call that shattered any hope. Days passed before Ethan finally bothered to call me. There was no remorse in his voice. He said he hoped I would respect his decision and that we could talk about it soon. There was no apology. There was no empathy. Just a demand disguised as courtesy. That was the moment I knew I had a decision to make. I had spent my whole life giving him everything, expecting nothing in return except for his love and respect. And now that he had shown me he had neither, it was my turn to decide what to do with what little remained between us. Update 1. The silence. Weeks passed after the wedding. After that day, when I stood outside the wedding hall, feeling invisible, irrelevant, completely removed from my own son's life. In that time, I made no effort to reach out. I didn't try to reopen any channels of communication. In the past, I would have rushed to call him, to ask what I had done wrong, to try to fix whatever the problem was, even if I didn't know what it was. But this time was different. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't seek explanations. I simply disappeared from his life the same way he had decided to erase me from his. At first, the silence was heavy. Every day, every hour, every minute without hearing from him felt like a reminder of how little I had meant to him. I couldn't help but wonder, would he ever miss me? Would he ever look back and feel even the slightest regret for what he had done? But as time passed, the weight grew lighter. I stopped looking at my phone, waiting for a message. I stopped checking social media for clues about his new life. And little by little, I found unexpected peace in the absence of his voice. The call that changed everything. Then, out of nowhere, the silence broke. The call came on an ordinary day, a day when I expected nothing from him. I glanced at my phone, and his name lit up the screen like a ghost from the past. I won't lie. For a second, my heart raced. For a moment, a part of me thought, maybe, just maybe, this call would bring an apology. Maybe a tiny sign of remorse. Maybe even a chance to rebuild what had been broken. But I was wrong. As soon as I answered, his tone was the same as always. As if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't humiliated me weeks ago. As if everything was fine between us. He greeted me with the same casualness he always used when he wanted something. And without wasting much time on formalities, he got straight to the point. He needed money. Apparently, the wedding had been far more expensive than planned. Madison, with her extravagant tastes and dream wedding fantasies, had spent way more than they had budgeted for. And now, despite the cash gifts from their guests, it wasn't enough to cover their honeymoon at Hawaiian Paradise Resort. They had come up short. And without hesitation, Ethan had decided to turn to me to fill that financial gap. As he spoke, explaining his situation with an almost insulting casualness, I couldn't help but wonder. How was it possible that he felt no shame? How could he call and ask me for money after what he had done? How could he even imagine that after excluding me from his wedding, he would have the audacity to ask me to finance his happiness with the woman who had been complicit in his disregard for me? I listened to his entire speech without interrupting, without saying a word. I let him talk, let him try to convince me with that voice that had once softened my heart. But now, all it did was fill me with indifference. And when he finished, when he finally stopped talking and waited for my response, I gave him the only answer he deserved. A hard no. I answered him with a calmness that even surprised me. No. Just as he had chosen to remove me from his wedding, I was now choosing to remove myself from his list of solutions. If he wanted a life without me, then he would have to live with the consequences of that decision. There was silence, a long, heavy, uncomfortable silence. And then his tone changed. Gone was the fake kindness. Now there was irritation. Disbelief. As if he truly could not comprehend that his own mother would dare to say no to him. "You should be grateful I'm even calling you," he said, his voice laced with arrogance, making my stomach turn. In another time, in another context, those words might have hurt me. They might have made me doubt myself, made me feel guilty. But in that moment, at that exact instant, all I felt was a dark, profound satisfaction. For the first time, I was truly seeing my son for who he was, an entitled man who saw his mother as nothing more than an ATM, an inexhaustible resource he could tap into whenever he needed, without ever giving anything in return. I hung up without another word. Then, I blocked his number. Minutes later, my phone vibrated again. A message from Madison. "You're a terrible mother. You ruined the start of our marriage." I read her words and, for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Because in that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. And the best part? This was just the beginning. Update 2. The silence that spoke volumes. Time passed, and the silence between us settled in again. But this time, it carried more weight. More meaning. It wasn't the awkward silence that comes with the hope of reconciliation. It was the silence that came with the certainty that the distance between us had become irreparable. After that last phone call, after my firm refusal and Madison's venomous message, I never heard from Ethan again. He made no further attempts to contact me. No attempts to convince me. And in some way, that confirmed what I had already suspected. He never called for any reason other than money. He never wanted to mend our relationship. There had never been even the slightest trace of genuine remorse. He only needed me when life backed him into a corner. But the universe has a funny way of settling scores. And it didn't take long before I started hearing about what was happening in his life. The information came from different sources, distant relatives, mutual acquaintances, snippets of overheard conversations. And, of course, social media. That curated showcase where people desperately try to make their lives look better than they really are. The honeymoon that Madison had always dreamed of turned out to be a watered-down version of what she had planned. Instead of the luxurious Hawaiian paradise resort with breathtaking ocean views, the one she had bragged about to her friends, they had to settle for Sunset Inn, a far less exclusive destination. In the photos they posted, they tried to fake happiness. But there was something off about the way they smiled. The way their friends' comments were filled with phrases like, "What matters is love," the kind of things people say when they know things aren't as perfect as they seem. But the honeymoon was just the beginning of their downfall. Reality hit them hard upon their return. The wedding had been an enormous financial burden. And now, with their bank accounts emptier than expected, tensions started to rise. I soon found out that Ethan and Madison had bought a house before the wedding, a home that Madison had picked out with the confidence that if financial trouble ever arose, I would be there to help. I could picture the conversation they must have had at the time. "Don't worry," she must have told him. "Your mom loves you too much to let you struggle." And Ethan, trusting, so sure she was right, had agreed. But now, without my financial backing, without my wallet to solve their problems, the bills started piling up. Payments started falling behind. And stress did what it always does in these situations. It revealed people's true colors. Madison, who had played the role of the loving wife so well, started showing signs of impatience. I knew because her once flashy social media, which had been filled with posts about their perfect life, became a barren wasteland. No more pictures of expensive dinners. No more shopping sprees. No more weekend getaways. Everything became duller. More mundane. And then, the second call came. But this time, it wasn't from Ethan. It was from Aunt Linda, someone who had never been entirely on my side, but had also never fully distanced herself from me the way Ethan had. Her tone on the other end of the line was a mix of caution and urgency. "Maggie," she said, dragging out my name with a hesitant sigh. "I don't want to meddle where I'm not wanted, but I heard that Ethan is having trouble with the house and, well, I thought maybe you'd want to talk to him." I stayed silent for a moment, letting her words settle. I knew exactly what she was doing, testing the waters, seeing if I still had any weakness left for my son. Seeing if there was still a part of me willing to drop everything and run to fix his life. So, with absolute calm, I responded with the exact words they had thrown at me at the wedding hall. I don't want any drama. There was silence on the other end. Then, a heavy sigh. Aunt Linda didn't argue. She didn't try to convince me. She didn't give me a speech about the importance of family. Maybe because deep down, she knew I was right. The days passed, and even though I had no direct contact with Ethan, bits and pieces of his life still found their way to me. A mutual acquaintance told me that Madison was growing resentful. She blamed Ethan for not planning better financially. She was colder with him, less affectionate. Someone else mentioned that Madison had even considered moving back in with her parents for a while, something that, for someone like her, must have felt like a humiliating defeat. Meanwhile, I was living my life with a peace I hadn't experienced in years. I focused on myself. I enjoyed my independence. I allowed myself the luxuries I had denied myself for so long because I had been too busy making sure Ethan had everything he needed. Until the final blow came. It happened during a conversation with an old friend. Someone who, by sheer coincidence, had run into Madison at a social event. She told me Madison looked different, distant, more withdrawn. And in the middle of a conversation with other women, Madison had bitterly muttered a sentence that confirmed what I already knew. Without his mother, Ethan is nothing. An old friend ran into Madison at a social event and noticed a change in her. She seemed distant, drained. In the middle of a conversation, she muttered bitterly, "Without his mother, Ethan is nothing." That was all I needed to hear. Time passed, and the cracks in their so-called perfect life deepened. The silence between us wasn't just empty, it was deafening. Ethan never tried to contact me again, and Madison's passive-aggressive messages stopped. But the truth always finds a way to surface. Through whispers from acquaintances and the occasional social media update, I pieced together the reality of their downfall. Madison no longer flaunted expensive gifts or weekend getaways. The house they had bought so eagerly had become a financial nightmare. Without my financial support, bills piled up, overdue payments stacked one on top of the other, and stress took its toll. Madison, who once played the devoted wife, began to pull away. A mutual acquaintance told me she was less patient with Ethan, colder in public, her sarcastic remarks revealing growing resentment. She blamed him for not giving her the life she expected, for failing her plan. She had assumed someone would step in to save them. That someone had always been me. But not this time. The breaking point. Then, the real collapse began. One day, in a fit of frustration, Madison left. It wasn't an official divorce. No legal papers, no final goodbye. She simply left. At first, she framed it as taking space or needing time to think. But everyone knew what it really meant. Soon, word spread that she no longer stayed at their home, the one they had built together. That she was going out more, seen with other men who could offer her the luxury she craved. And Ethan? My son, the boy who once held my hand and looked up to me with admiration, was now just a man left alone in an empty house, drowning in debts he couldn't pay, weighed down by a life he was never truly prepared for. The final confirmation. I knew their fantasy had fully crumbled when I received a message. Not from Ethan. Not from Madison. But from Aunt Linda, the same aunt who had once tried to convince me to help him. This time, her tone was different. No hesitation. No persuasion. Just a blunt statement. Ethan isn't doing well. I don't know if you care or not, but I felt you should know. I read the message once. Twice. 3 times. And then, I waited to feel something. The impulse to call. The urge to ask. The instinct to fix things. But I felt nothing. Update 4. The aftermath. Time passed as it always does, without pausing for anyone. The rumors about Ethan faded, not because his situation had improved, but because misery loses its shock value when it becomes routine. From the bits and pieces I gathered, he was still in that house, alone. The whispers of his separation were no longer just speculation, they were fact. Madison had not only left, she had moved on. And in the most telling way possible, by finding someone richer, someone more ambitious. Someone who could give her what Ethan never could. I wasn't surprised. From the moment I met her, I knew Madison was incapable of love, at least, not for anyone but herself. But what did surprise me, what I found almost poetic, was how quickly Ethan ended up completely alone. He had no friends to turn to. Because the people he thought were his closest friends were just acquaintances, people who were around when there were parties, fancy dinners, and celebrations. But when the invitations stopped, so did their presence. He had no family to rely on. Because he had chosen to cut off the one person who had always been there for him. And after all this time, after everything that had happened, after months of silence, one day my phone rang. Ethan's name lit up the screen. My phone rang. Ethan's name glowed on the screen, a ghost from the past refusing to fade. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail, just like all the opportunities he had wasted. But curiosity won. His voice was different. Gone was the arrogance. He sounded tired, as if the weight of his choices had finally crushed him. No fake pleasantries, no attempts to smooth things over. Just a simple request. He needed to see me. To talk. Maybe once, I would have seen this as a chance to rebuild. But I wasn't just any mother, not after everything. So, with an icy calm, I asked, "What do you really want?" Silence. Then, a heavy sigh before the truth spilled out. He needed help. Money. The house, his prized symbol of independence, was drowning him in debt. He couldn't sell it, couldn't keep up with payments. And he had no one else to turn to. I listened, letting his words settle. But I felt nothing, no sympathy, no guilt, no desire to save him. Because I finally understood. He wasn't calling me. He wasn't looking for his mother. He was looking for security, for a safety net. I answered with the same calmness he had once used when shutting me out of his wedding. You chose your path. I chose mine. And, unfortunately, it no longer includes you. Silence. Then, his voice cracked. Are you really going to abandon me? I didn't falter. I hope you find someone to help you. Because I won't. And before he could beg, before he could try to manipulate me again, I hung up. Final update. The lesson he never wanted to learn. Days passed, and the weight of that last conversation faded. Not because I forgot. Not because the pain healed. But because, at some point, it simply stopped mattering. Ethan's life unraveled, but it was no longer my burden to carry. The house that had once symbolized his independence became his downfall. Unable to sell it at the price he wanted, he lost nearly everything. Homeless. Broke. Stripped of the illusion of a life that was never truly his. For a while, he searched for help, distant relatives, old friends, anyone who still felt enough pity to extend a hand. But people grow tired of carrying those who never learned to stand on their own. And Madison? She moved on with terrifying ease, as if Ethan had never existed. She married a wealthy businessman, one who could give her the life she had always craved. Their travels, luxury dinners, and extravagant lifestyle were plastered all over social media, a calculated message to the world, a final erasure of her past mistake. I wondered if Ethan had seen the photos. If he had felt the same burning humiliation I once did when he excluded me from his wedding without remorse. But the difference between us? When he betrayed me, I still had my life, my independence, my peace. But Ethan? He gambled everything on a single card. And when that card burned, he was left with nothing. Rumors said he had moved into a small apartment, taken a mediocre job just to survive, his life reduced to a shadow of what it once was. But eventually, even those whispers faded. Because I stopped listening. I stopped caring. Because while he was falling, I was rising. For years, I had given him everything, ensuring he never lacked a thing. And when the time came for him to prove it was all worth it, he cast me aside. Like I meant nothing. But now, after everything, I finally understood. The most ruthless revenge is not always an act of destruction. Sometimes, the cruelest justice is simply letting life do its work. And life, merciless and fair, taught Ethan the lesson he never wanted to learn. As for me, I moved forward. Not with anger, not with hatred, but with the unshakable certainty that I had finally reclaimed what had always been mine. My peace.